Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Mr. Sparky. No, I'm not, but for today I am kind of. For today's video, we're going to be having a look at the Viltrox Z3, this thing over here. Full disclaimer, I entered and was selected in Viltrox's free testing program. So they sent me the flash and I'm going to make content with it. That's what you're watching. And yes, I do get to keep it. In this video, I intend to test some of the claims as well as talk about my general opinions about this flash. With that, let's get into it. What's in the box? Well, before we do that, I do want to say this box is fairly nice. It looks pretty cool and kind of fits the aesthetic that they're going for. But really, when you open it up, all you really get is the flash that you see over here, this diffuser, and a warranty card that has a QR code to the user manual and the official site for Viltrox. So not much, pretty minimally packed, and that's pretty nice. I do appreciate it. What is the Z3? I'm gonna say Z3. It is a compact fixed position flash in that it doesn't angle upwards unless I snap it off its mount, and there's obviously no zoom head as well. It is fairly coolly styled with a cyberpunk aesthetic, if you couldn't tell, and I think it is quite a nice look. Obviously, you might have noticed on the top there's a cutout so you can see into the unit somewhat, and it's fairly cool. I assume that this flash in general was made due to the recent popularity of the direct flash look, but I do want to point out it's not the smallest of the new batch of little mini flashes, but it does have some cool tricks. For example, this one features A-TTL auto mode, so it will actually properly flash meter. But obviously this depends on which version of the flash you get, so don't go buying the Fuji one and then slapping it on a Sony camera. I have the Sony one and I've slapped it on a Sony camera. So the auto mode works fine for me. One thing to note, at least with the Sony one, is that you can't really put this on another camera and expect it to work even in the manual mode. And I assume it has to do with this smart shoe bit. It kind of sticks out in the front, and I assume it gets in the way of this center pin aligning with the other hot shoes, or with hot shoes that don't have the smart bits in the way. At any rate, one of the things Z3 can do is act as a slave flash, and it can work with or without the pre-flash depending on the mode that you set it to. And it's on this side of the flash here, that's the switch. And of course, when you're operating as a slave flash, this only works in the manual mode. Lastly, the flash is a pretty budget-friendly flash, coming in at around 55 USD, but I do see that it does go on sale from time to time for around 44 USD or so. So it is a very budget-friendly flash for what you get. Operation and feel. The flash is pretty intuitive to use, and I think it's pretty well built and excellently designed, to say the least. The flash really only has a handful of controls, and it's nice to see that the hot shoe is a metal shoe. The charge port is on the left side, and along that side, again, you'll have that slave flash mode switch, which we'll get into a little bit. On the rear, you have the actual flash controls, and they're pretty good to use. And as I said, it's pretty intuitive because you can just slap it on your camera, set it to auto, and off you go. But you do have the option for manual mode as well. And when it's in manual mode, you have this nice, large power toggling setting or power adjustment setting, which is this dial here, which has 7 levels to adjust from full power to 1/64th power. The rotary control on it is pretty nice, and I think it has pretty good clicks in between positions. But that being said, these dial bits are plastic. But this also contributes to the fact that this thing is really quite light, even though it's not the most compact flash. Although, maybe, special edition, where you make this thing out of metal, would be pretty cool. Viltrox? A nice touch is the battery indication on the flash itself. There's not really a lot to look at while you're looking at the flash, but if you power it on, you'll see an LED blink, and that indicates over here where's your approximate charge level, with 4 blinks being maximum, 1 being 0 to 25%, and no blinks, meaning it's dead. Probably don't have any LEDs on at that point. Additionally, when you do power up the flash, there is a status LED, which also doubles up as a test flash button. When it's green, it's good to go. When it's red, it's charging. And when things are blinky red, it means things are getting hot and I need to cool down. And this does happen if you are popping lots of consecutive full power flashes, or maybe just enough flashes in general. I was doing it with full power ones. Which kind of brings me to my first criticism. One of the pitches is that this flash has a fast 1-second recycle time at full power, and that's pretty true. But it never really mentions the cooldown interval other than 1 or 2 lines in the manual explaining the LED status color. I know, it's not really that likely that someone's gonna actually run into the limit that often, because you're probably not gonna be doing a lot of full power pops, but when I was testing it in normal room temperature scenarios, around 20 degrees C, I found I would only be able to get around 20 consecutive full power pops before this would need some cooling down. Normally needing only 7 to 8 seconds to cool down before you can shoot again. But sometimes the intervals between pops would be slower, some be a little more, and it's not a huge deal, but it is worth noting. Plus, I did notice that on some attempts or on some cooldowns, it would take up to 15 to 20 seconds. And I'm not really sure why that is, whether or not it was just the things inside were getting really, really hot, or if I was just running down the battery too quickly. But either way, things to note. Let's do some contextualizing here. Taking into account the recharge time and cooldown times for the Z3, this is still, I believe, a faster recharge/recycle experience than when using traditional AA powered flashes, especially given how consistent this flash recharges. The 1-second recycle time is generally pretty realistic, and this isn't something that you'd normally get with AA powered flashes. Usually you can expect to see progressively longer and longer cycle times as you run the batteries down. Now, when I was actually shooting with this flash, the thing is I would actually pop this mainly in auto mode, mainly to play with the TTL mode, and I found it did a pretty solid job. And the flash compensation on the camera was nice and consistent. Overall, I found the light output to be, at least for me, fairly good. Keep in mind, I'm no pro flash-o-grapher. So again, keep this with a lethal grain of salt. In manual mode, I was actually playing around with it, and it was nice to be able to quickly flip into manual and just play around with power levels. And again, I really like the tactility of these control knobs for the power level. Pretty nice. Even though if I was out and about, I would normally have this in auto mode. If I was doing something slower pace, I actually did prefer to chunk it in manual and play around with it on my A7 II. Lastly, let's talk about that slave mode. Now, I don't have 2 of these Z3s, but I do have regular old Canon speedlights, and I use it in the S1 optical triggering mode inside a bedroom. And when I was playing with it, I found that the flash trigger was actually pretty reliable on this thing, and it's actually a pretty cool feature to have on such a small and cheap flash. This is super neat. Now, if only I were better at lighting things with flashes, then maybe I would use this more, but I'm kind of poop at it. Testing the claims of the Z3. With small flashes like this, I'm beginning to notice a trend of pretty lackluster technical specifications and documentation. Unfortunately, the Z3 is no exception. There are a lot of numbers for sure in the documentation, but there always, for some reason, tends to be a lack of detail when it comes to guide number, or otherwise useful tables more commonly found on something like traditional Canon speedlights, or speedlights in general. I'm guessing part of this is the perceived casual nature of these things. I get it. Chunk it on, set it on auto, and forget. But I'm an engineer, and I like numbers. Give me numbers. Before you ask, yes, I did reach out to see if they had more technical specifications about things like guide number values to share, and they simply pointed me to the manual. The Z3 manual doesn't directly give guide numbers, which is a shame, because they're pretty cool. Instead, they give you the value of power output in watt-seconds. Specifically, this can output 26 watt-seconds of light, which is a number. It's a neat number, and it tells you how much energy is dumped in a flash pulse, which is neat, but not useful. There isn't a direct way to math out the exposure settings with watt-seconds. Unlike where if they provided a guide number value, you could do some math and figure out the exposure based on your camera, your lens, and your settings. I understand, again, probably moot since the intent is probably to jam it into auto mode and use it with the A-TTL metering. But it does also claim that you're supposed to have the ability to bump into manual to get full creative control, and that's harder to do without good info. Unless the intent was just to have people randomly fiddling while shooting, popping flashes, and just trying to figure it out. Luckily, in the manual, they do actually have a section that's labeled M Manual Mode and it has a guide table, which looks like something you'd expect out of an exposure table, but I'm really not sure what kind of metrics they use to determine the effectiveness of the flash based on the numbers that they have. Because anytime I tried any of the values that they suggested, things turned out dark as hell, at least a stop or two under. And when I try to predict the GN values based on what they provide, it suggests that the GN value of this flash is around GN 14. So how did I land on 14-ish? Well, I used the ISO 100 values on the table, and by doing that, I basically did 2.8 times 0.9 multiplied by the square root of 32, and that roughly gave me 14.25. I did a few more calculations with their odd chart and calculated values in other parts of the chart. And this is where things are a bit weird, because it was a bit inconsistent. I would get numbers ranging from 14 to almost 16. Not great and not really reflective of reality. Now, how did I actually find the GN value of this thing? Well, I used my trusty Minolta Autometer 4F, and I measured the flash output, and then that allowed me to calculate the GN value based on the sample that the meter found. Yay! And I did this by setting my distance to 1 meter, my flash meter to ISO 100, setting the flash to full power, and then giving it a pop. And it showed a value of around f8.5 stops, or to 8 2/3 stops. With these values, I'd more or less round up and call that f10. And having set the distance at 1 meter, the GN value calculated was 10. Easy peasy mathy squeezy, probably. And here's some sample shots that I took using my numbers, and they, I think, look relatively representative. Right. Since I didn't find the tables that were provided fairly useful, I decided to make my own. So my table is set at ISO 100, and I have a second table which takes into account the diffuser that's given with this flash, which robs around 1.5 stops of light. So I'll put it up here somewhere, and I'll find a way to link it in the description below. Now, I do admit my flash table is also not that standard. Normally you got flash power and flash coverage in the chart, but this is a fixed flash, so my axes are a bit different. But I think they still generally make sense. Have a look and check it out. Viltrox, feel free to test against my table, and if you spot any glaring differences that are out to lunch in mine, let me know if I missed something or if I'm interpreting things weird. Otherwise, the next thing that I tested out was flash coverage. And in this regard, the metric I used was fairly simplistic. If the flash coverage was within about half stop of the center value on my meter, I would generally call it within the field of view. And if it dropped below that, I would say it was out of range. Now, I only did this for around 2 meters or so, and that's just because I don't have infinite space. But I found that the coverage was actually a little bit wider, at least at these short distances, than the 35mm stated in the manual. So that's pretty neat that I was able to reliably light around 28mm worth of field of view for about 2 to 3 meters. I would say that the 35mm field of view is probably correct. So awesome. But again, I'm not really sure what metrics were used to come up with these numbers, but at least based on my super duper scientific testing, they seem all right. And when it comes to flash temperature, things look pretty solid to me. Now, the last thing that I was able to test was endurance. The stated life of this is 650 full power pops. Now, I didn't record the entire test this time because that took longer than I thought. You possibly might have guessed that 650 pops, 1 second recycle time, that's not that long, 11 minutes. You have 11 minutes, but as I said, it's not 650 consecutive pops, it's more like 20 pops, wait to cool, do some more pops, wait to cool, wait to cool again, do some more pops. It took me almost 80 minutes to go through the battery. That said, part of it was partway through, I decided just to let the flash cool for a couple minutes, so I popped out of the room to do some dinner prep. Then I popped back up for another full set of pops. So how many pops did I get off before the battery died? Well, 622. 28 shy of 650. I'd still call that within earshot of their stated life, which is pretty dang good. And I'm sure given another test result, I might be closer to the number that they stated. And maybe if I change the way I did it, I might, again, be closer to their actual number. It's a lot of pops. And another thing I do want to say is once it does die, I did find that it took roughly 70 minutes to fully charge the flash. I plugged it in and connected it to a USB monitoring device, and it charges at roughly 10 watts. So yeah, the numbers there also check out. Good stuff. All right, before we wrap up, let's have a look at some samples of things that I popped with the flash and my A7. Wait, things that I popped. What's that even? Whatever. We're going to look at photos. That's what we're going to do. So do I like the Z3 and would I recommend it? Yeah, I actually think it's quite a fun little flash and I would recommend it. This is especially true if you're someone who's just looking to get a direct flash and you don't really want to think, since you could just chunk it on the camera, set it to auto, and you're off to the races. It is really quite good for that. And additionally, the convenience features of having it be a USB rechargeable device is also a plus. The design is also very good, and if you do want to get into the more creative modes, that is manual, the interface I find is very intuitive and very quick. So there's no rapid button presses or anything. Flip a switch, rotate the dial, and continue to shoot as you would. Now, I will say, I do wish this flash had one feature, and that would be tilting. I know, it's a bit much to ask for something like this, especially given the effort that went into the design, but for me, this is a fun flash, but this would be legitimately a useful flash if it could tilt and I could bounce it off things. As I stated earlier, I'm not one for the direct flash look, so I do generally appreciate the clip-on diffuser, but even better would be bouncy uppiness. That said, this flash is also very cool and worth noting over some of the other mini flashes because that slave mode is actually quite neat, and it legitimately does open up the option for more creative options if you have multiple flash units, since controlling these was pretty easy and honestly, again, something that you don't normally see on stuff this small. Heck, even on some larger flashes, on some of my older speedlights, they don't do that. So yeah, pretty cool little unit overall. Thanks again to Viltrox for selecting me. I do like playing with these things, even if direct flash photography isn't really my style. It's fun to push these little devices and see if their spec sheets meet reality. And again, I do really appreciate that they sent me this. But I'd appreciate it even more if manufacturers would start providing real GN figures. You don't even need to make the table. I'll make a table. I'm okay at Excel. Just give me the GN number. That'd be swell. And if you're interested in this flash, I'll pop a link in the description below. It's not an affiliate link or anything. I'm just gonna link you to the Viltrox page so you can have a look for yourself. That's all I got. Let me know what you think of the Viltrox Z3, or generally what you think of these micro flashes in general and the trend of manufacturers kind of dropping these quite frequently. Let me know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.